Economy trash doesn't ride up here, she sneered, ripping my bag from the overhead bin. Contracts, family photos. My life scattered across the first-class carpet. Laughter rippled, sharp and cruel. They think I'm nothing. They see only the color of my skin, the scuffs on my carry-on. What they don't know, what none of them suspects, is that inside that bag is a tablet, a single line of code capable of bringing these arrogant skies to a standstill. A kindness will emerge from the darkness. Oh, they have no idea how this calculated humiliation will change everything. Now I rebuild and ignite. Every movement was measured here. Passengers tucking coats into compartments, attendants placing designer handbags on velvet rests. It was the curated calm of money and prestige. You're coming with us now. Into this silence stepped Dr. Lorraine Whitfield, 55 years old, carrying herself with the calm down right now. We're trying to help you, ma'am. Her blazer, a tailored midnight navy with silver thread accents, whispered luxury without screaming for attention. In her right hand, she wielded discreet leather carry-on, polished from years of travel, its weight steady, familiar. For Lorraine, this bag was more than luggage. It held her tools, her records, her notes from decades of building an empire. Inside were sealed financial documents, a slim laptop encrypted beyond imagination, and one fragile thing, a framed photograph of her family, always tucked between files as a reminder of why she worked as hard as she did. She rose on tiptoe, guiding the carry-on into the overhead bin above seat 2A. Her movements were unhurried, precise, practiced. She had done this thousands of times. For a moment, everything seemed ordinary. Then a shadow fell across her shoulder. "Excuse me," came a sharp voice. A woman in a pressed uniform stepped forward, chin high, lips pursed. Her name tag caught the light. Veronica Hale Lid, flight attendant. She looked at Lorraine's bag as if it were an intruder. "This doesn't belong here. Economy passengers don't get first-class space." The words landed with the weight of judgment. No inquiry, no courtesy, just accusation. Around them, several heads turned. A man adjusting his cufflinks paused. Another woman with pearls shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Lorraine turned, measured her expression calm, though her pulse tapped faster. "I believe you're mistaken. This is my assigned seat." She held out her boarding pass with a steady hand. Veronica's eyes narrowed, scanning Lorraine from head to toe. Her gaze lingered on the dark skin, the simple but elegant jewelry, the small scuffs on the leather bag. Instead of reading the pass carefully, she huffed through her nose. "Ma'am, this bin is reserved for first-class passengers. I'll need you to remove this bag." Before Lorraine could reply, Veronica reached up, fingers closing around the handle. With one harsh tug, she yanked the carry-on down. The sudden movement was violent, jarring. The zipper caught. The bag slipped from her grasp, and in a cruel instant it tumbled open on the cabin floor. The silence broke. Folders burst, wide pages of contracts and charts skittered across the carpet like leaves in the wind. A slim laptop slid bouncing against a seat leg. A silk scarf uncoiled like a flag of surrender. And worst of all, the small silver frame clattered the photo of Lorraine's family spinning face up before strangers' eyes. Her husband's smile, her daughter's graduation cap, all exposed on the floor of first class. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Someone's wine glass rattled against porcelain. The quiet luxury had cracked, replaced by the sharp sting of humiliation. And then laughter from across the aisle came, the booming chuckle of Alan Prescott, a white man in his early 50s, sharp suit stretched a little tight across his belly. He leaned back in his seat, savoring the spectacle. "Guess she thought she was important," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "First class is in a library, lady. Maybe try the back where you belong." A few nervous giggles followed, the kind that come not from amusement, but from fear of standing out. Others looked away, eyes fixed on their champagne or phones, eager to avoid the discomfort. It was the quiet complicity of privilege. See something cruel, pretend not to notice. But not everyone stayed silent. Just 2 rows behind Lorraine, a woman in her 60s shifted forward. Her hair was silver. Her voice still carried the authority of decades of service. Evelyn Carter, once a senior flight attendant, now a retired grandmother traveling to see family, clenched her fists. "That's not how we were trained to treat passengers. she said firmly, her words cutting through the hush, her eyes locked on Veronica. You don't yank a bag from someone's hands. You don't shame them in front of a cabin. Not ever. The statement hung heavy, daring contradiction. Veronica's cheeks flushed crimson. She straightened her uniform, tried to regain control. I was following procedure, she snapped, though her voice quivered with defensiveness. On the far side, a younger woman raised her phone higher. I'm Amira Hassan, 27, an AI engineer traveling on business, had been recording since the moment Veronica's hand touched the carry-on. Her voice soft but resolute, narrated under her breath. They humiliated her for nothing. She's in seat 2A. Look at her ticket. This is wrong. At the same time, a different lens captured the scene. Claudia Mercer, 38, a lifestyle blogger with bleached hair and a bright red manicure, smirked as she aimed her phone. She typed quickly, captioning her clip with biting words. Entitled Passenger Caught Faking First Class. Flight crew shutting her down. Chad, know your place. She wanted views controversy. In her mind, siding with the uniform was safe, and the outrage would fuel her brand. Two narratives born in the same instant, one of injustice, one of ridicule, both destined to spread. And in seat 2A, Lorraine knelt, her knees pressed into the carpet as she reached for her belongings. One by one, she gathered them, pages of reports, the laptop, the scarf. Her fingers closed around the silver frame last. She held it gently, brushing away a speck of dust. Her expression betrayed no fury, no tears, only composure, cool and sharp as glass. If humiliation was meant to break her, it had failed. She had lived through boardroom betrayals, hostile takeovers, politicians' sneers. This was a different kind of battlefield, and she knew how to fight it. Jonas Miller, seated quietly with the notepad balanced on his knee, observed everything. A journalist without assignment, he had boarded this flight as a traveler, but instinct guided his pen. He scribbled down the words, the names, the reactions. Something told him this was no ordinary confrontation. Something in the woman's stillness, the steel in her eyes, hinted at a story that would explode beyond this cabin. Lorraine stood slowly, dignity, gathered piece by piece with her belongings. She placed the frame back in the bag, tucked the folders neatly inside, and closed the zipper. She looked at Veronica, whose jaw was tight, whose authority had cracked but not yet broken. Lorraine's voice was soft enough that only Veronica and perhaps Alan across the aisle could hear. You just made a grave error, she said. No threat, no raised tone, just a statement heavy with certainty. The cabin was frozen, a tableau of judgment and shame, of phones recording truth and lies. Champagne went untouched, conversations abandoned. All eyes, whether curious, complicit, or condemning, were drawn to the woman in seat 2A, who had been treated as if she did not belong. Lorraine sat back straight, hands folded on her lap. Around her, the ripple of silence deepened, but beneath it was something else. The low hum of devices capturing, uploading, sharing. In the digital age, humiliation never stayed inside a room. It spilled outward, multiplying, changing hands and meaning with every click. And as the plane prepared for takeoff, the world outside had already begun to watch. Phones buzzed, screens lit up. A video 10 seconds long showing a woman's belongings scattered on the first-class floor. A man laughing and a flight attendant standing with the arms crossed was uploaded. The caption read, "They pulled her bag down like she didn't matter." Within minutes, it began to spread. The silence in the cabin lasted only seconds before the air fractured into whispers. The scratch of typing, the subtle click of cameras. Humiliation was no longer private. It was currency, and everyone wanted a piece of it. Amira Hassan's hand shook as she angled her phone, but her voice was steady. The camera caught the overhead bins still open the scatter of papers across the carpet, the photo frame glinting faintly. Her commentary was quiet but cutting. This woman is in seat 2A. She has a first-class ticket. They humiliated her for nothing. Everyone here saw it. She zoomed in on Lorraine's boarding pass, bold letters printed across it. First class 2, AC right here. And they pulled her bag down like she didn't belong. Within seconds, her live stream had a dozen viewers, then 50, then hundreds. Strangers from across the world began typing into the comment feed. What the hell? That's racist, plain and simple. Name the airline. The comments poured in faster than Amamira could read. She hadn't meant for it to blow up this quickly. She only wanted to document to protect the truth before it was twisted. But now she realized the truth was escaping the cabin in real time. Across the aisle, Claudia Mercer smirked, typing furiously on her own screen. Her version of the event, only 20 seconds long, showed Veronica pulling the bag down and Alan laughing. She had captioned it entitled, "Passenger Caught Trying to Stash Her Economy Bag in First-Class Space. Flight Attendant Shuts Her Down. Handshot, Know Your Place." Within minutes, her followers, tens of thousands of them, always hungry for drama, were amplifying it. Lol. Finally, someone stood up to these wannabes. She probably forged that pass. Crew should have kicked her out already. Two narratives, two worlds, both born in the same space, both accelerating down parallel tracks of the internet. Lorraine remained silent, methodically sliding her files back into the carry-on. She brushed her scarf free of dust, folded it with care, and placed it inside. The frame of her family she tucked between folders, the glass cool against her fingers. To an observer, it looked like she was merely cleaning up. To those who knew better, it was the rebuilding of composure, the deliberate act of claiming dignity after it had been ripped away. Evelyn Carter leaned closer, her voice low but firm, meant for Veronica. "You don't speak to passengers that way, not in my time, not ever." Her tone carried the weight of years of someone who had guided frightened travelers through turbulence, who had cradled crying infants at $30,000. Veronica flinched but did not reply. Alan Prescott, emboldened by the laughter he triggered earlier, crossed his arms and leaned back. "You can glare all you want," he sneered toward Lorraine, "but rules are rules. You don't get to take up space you didn't earn." His smirk widened, pleased with himself, pleased with the tension his words fueled. Lorraine finally looked at him, not with anger, not even with disdain, but with a gaze so steady it made Alan falter for a moment, shifting in his seat. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Silence in the right hands could cut sharper than words. Meanwhile, Jonas Miller adjusted his glasses and typed furiously into his phone. He wasn't live streaming. He knew the power of weighting of context, but he captured every detail. Veronica's gesture, Alan's laughter, Evelyn's protest, Amamira's steady defense. He noted the divide in reactions. The way some passengers hunched lower in their seats, unwilling to take sides. He had covered scandals before, but something about the poised woman in 2A felt larger. His instincts buzzed. This story would not end inside the fuselage of Clear Sky Flight 4A2. At the rear of the cabin, Marcus Lee stood in a uniform called forward after Veronica's sharp report of unauthorized luggage. He bent over slightly, asking to see Lorraine's boarding pass himself. When she handed it to him, his eyes flicked across the details, pausing on one line most would miss. VIP Tier 1 Skylink, his brow furrowed. Crew weren't trained to handle Tier 1 passengers. They were usually flagged to management before boarding. Why hadn't the system caught this? He tucked the observation away, knowing he couldn't confront his superior. Not yet. But unease noted at him. Back in her seat, Amamira kept narrating softly, feeding her viewers the truth as she saw it. This isn't just about a seat. Look at how calm she is, how they're trying to make her look like she doesn't belong. I don't know her name, but she doesn't deserve this. The comments swelled, screenshots spread. Her video was already being clipped, reposted, threaded on Twitter. Claudia's clip, meanwhile, gathered its own momentum. Thousands mocked Lorraine, believing the narrative of a woman trying to sneak into first class. Influencers reshared it with laughing emojis, adding fuel to the fire. The polarization had begun. Veronica, noticing Claudia's phone pointed toward her, smoothed her uniform and held her chin higher as if she were the righteous protector of order. Her voice, loud enough for the cabin, declared, "This will not be tolerated. Passengers attempting to occupy unauthorized seating will be reported." The words carried a false certainty, a gamble that public confidence could erase private doubt. Lorraine placed her bag neatly under the seat in front of her. She adjusted her blazer, folded her hands on her lap, and finally spoke not to the cabin, not to the recording phones, but directly to Veronica in a tone so low it was almost intimate. "You just made a grave error." The words landed like a gavel. Not shouted, not dramatic, simply factual, inevitable. Evelyn's eyes widened slightly. Alan scoffed through unease flickered behind his arrogance. Veronica stiffened, but she did not answer. The cabin settled again, but it was not the calm of luxury anymore. It was the tense silence before a storm, the awareness that something irreversible had been set in motion. Outside the aircraft, the storm had already begun. Amamira's live stream crossed 3,000 viewers' comments, scrolling so fast she couldn't read them. Screenshots of Lorraine kneeling on the carpet with her scattered files flooded Twitter. Some sympathetic others mocking. Claudia's clip trended simultaneously under a different hashtag, filling feeds with derision. Two stories, two truths, racing each other across the digital sky. And in seat 2A, Lorraine Whitfield sat unmoved, eyes forward, as if she could already see the consequences gathering like thunderclouds just beyond the horizon. The captain's voice crackled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be departing shortly. Please take your seats." But few passengers moved. They were too busy refreshing their phones, watching the numbers climb, sensing that they were part of something larger, something that was only just beginning. The engines hummed low beneath the floor, a steady vibration coursing through the cabin as the aircraft prepared for pushback. Passengers shifted in their seats, fastening belts, pulling blankets to their laps. But the atmosphere in first class was not the quiet anticipation of takeoff. It was charged, brittle, like the silence before a storm. Lorraine Whitfield sat motionless in seat 2A, her posture impeccable, her expression unreadable. The bag that had been so carelessly dragged down now rested beneath her seat, zipped tight. From the outside, she appeared calm, perhaps even resigned, but beneath her hands resting neatly on the armrest, a different current moved. Slowly, deliberately, she slid her hand into the slim pocket of her blazer and withdrew a tablet no larger than a paperback. Its matte black surface reflected nothing. The screen lit up with the faintest glow, shielded from view by the angle of her body. Her fingers began to move across it with practiced precision. No wasted motions, no hesitation. She had done this before. From 2 rows back, Amamira Hassan caught a glimpse of the glow. Her live stream was still running, but she angled the camera away, choosing for once to keep something private. She leaned closer to her friend across the aisle, whispering, "She's doing something. Look at her hands." The friend shrugged nervously. To them, it looked like a woman distracted by her device, but Amira sensed more. Across the aisle, Alan Prescott noticed too. He scoffed loud enough for the nearest seats to hear. "Of course, she's fiddling with a gadget now, probably trying to Photoshop a ticket to look real." His derision was sharp, designed to sting, but it slid past Lorraine like rain against glass. She didn't flinch. Her attention stayed locked on the shifting coat across her screen. A few rows behind, Jonas Miller adjusted his glasses, leaning forward slightly, his notepad balanced on his lap. He had seen the humiliation, the fall of papers, the quiet dignity with which Lorraine had recovered. Now he saw something else, something quieter, but far more dangerous. The deliberate nature of her motions, the faint curve of her lips as though it's some private joke. He scribbled in his notes. "She's not rattled. She's preparing." At the rear of the cabin, Marcus Lee had stepped aside after checking Lorraine's boarding pass. He couldn't shake the feeling, gnawing at him. VIP Tier 1 Skylink. He'd seen the designation once in a training manual years ago, but only as a passing reference. Tier 1 passengers were so rare that most crew went entire careers without encountering one. They weren't just wealthy, they were connected, tethered to something larger than airlines themselves. He remembered the line in the manual coordinate directly with operations, "Do not question Tier 1 status." So why had Veronica questioned it? Why hadn't their system flagged her boarding? Marcus's eyes moved back to Lorraine. She looked serene, yet his instincts told him she was far from passive. The tablet in her lap glowed faintly, lines of encrypted code dancing across the screen. He wasn't close enough to read, but the way she typed, swift assured, made his chest tighten. Something was happening here, something beyond a petty cabin dispute. He cleared his throat, stepping cautiously down the aisle. Veronica glanced at him, irritation sharp in her eyes. "Why are you lingering?" she pissed. Marcus lowered his voice. "Her boarding pass shows Tier 1 clearance. So Are you sure I don't care what it shows?" Veronica snapped, her tone sharp enough to draw looks from nearby passengers. "This is my cabin and she's not above the rules." Marcus swallowed his protest, but unease deepened. He knew better than to challenge a lead attendant in front of passengers. But something told him Veronica was walking into quicksand. He could only wait and bear witness. Lorraine's screen shifted. The blue glow brightened, displaying a series of symbols that resembled flight codes, but layered with something deeper, something no ordinary passenger would ever see. She tapped her thumbprint against the corner. The device vibrated softly. A new window opened, Skylink Protocol. The letters glowed pale white, pulsing like a heartbeat. Jonas leaned forward, pretending to adjust his shoe, but his eyes caught the faint reflection of the letters in the gloss of Lorraine's tablet. He froze. Skylink. He knew that name. Everyone in aviation did. Skylink wasn't an airline. It was the hidden infrastructure that coordinated air traffic across continents, the backbone linking FAA systems to carriers worldwide. Access to it was reserved for an inner circle of executives and regulators. What was a passenger doing with a Skylink device? Lorraine tapped again, and the word "standby" appeared. At that precise moment, the cabin lights flickered. Just once, just enough for people to look up in confusion. A subtle ripple moved through the screens of the in-flight entertainment system. For a second, seatback monitors glowed with static before returning to their usual welcome screen. A few passengers grumbled, thinking little of it, but Marcus noticed. His training screamed at him. System anomalies weren't coincidences. He looked again at Lorraine, whose face was illuminated by the faint blue glow. Alan laughed, oblivious. "Look at her, probably checking her Facebook, trying to get sympathy from her little fan club online." His arrogance rang hollow, now tinged with unease at the flicker of the lights. Evelyn Carter, meanwhile, watched Lorraine with something close to reverence. She recognized composure when she saw it, the kind of calm that came from years of carrying weight others couldn't imagine. She leaned toward the woman next to her. That's not a woman faking her place. That's a woman who knows exactly where she belongs. Amamira's live stream chat exploded. Thousands were watching now, many demanding names, others begging her to turn the camera back toward Lorraine. She hesitated, choosing instead to film the cabin's mood, the tension, the flicker of lights, Alan's mocking expression, Veronica's stiff posture. Her viewers filled the screen with questions. What's happening? Why did the lights flicker? Show her again. Lorraine, unbothered, slid the tablet halfway under the fold-down tray, shielding it from curious eyes. Her fingers continued to dance, entering commands with the grace of someone not merely reacting, but orchestrating. She paused, pressed one final key. The word on the screen shifted, protocol engaged. Jonas's pen scratched across paper. His pulse quickened. She's not just a passenger, she's a player. But what game is this? Marcus stepped closer, unable to contain his worry. He bent slightly, whispering to Veronica. Ma'am, something's happening with the systems. Did you notice the flicker? Veronica dismissed him with a wave. Eyes locked on Lorraine like a hawk circling prey. She's trying to intimidate us. Ignore it. But Marcus couldn't ignore it. He had a feeling this was no mere intimidation. Lorraine finally leaned back, slipping the tablet into her bag as though she had only been checking her email. She folded her hands once more, gaze fixed on the horizon through the oval window. From the outside, she was a calm traveler awaiting takeoff. Inside, she had just pulled a string only a handful of people in the world even knew existed. And then, almost imperceptibly, every seatback screen blinked once more. This time, for less than a second, a phrase appeared so quick most passengers missed it. Marcus saw it. Jonas saw it. Amir caught it on camera. And in that instant, the tension that had been simmering became undeniable. Something beyond the cabin, beyond the petty humiliation, had been set in motion. Lorraine remained still. Only her eyes, glinting with quiet certainty, revealed that she knew exactly what storm was about to break. Jonas lifted his head from his notes. his voice a whisper only he could hear. This isn't just a story anymore. This is history in motion. The cabin was supposed to be settling into the rhythm of departure seatbelts, clicking announcements murmuring through the speakers, attendants preparing for safety checks. But instead, tension swirled like smoke through the air. It was in the way passengers leaned closer to one another, the way screens lit their faces as they scrolled, the way silence cracked under whispered debates. On Air Hassan's phone, the live stream counter spun upward like a broken odometer. 3,000 viewers became 10, then 50. The chat flooded with disbelief, outrage, and questions. Which airline named the attendant? That's racism caught on tape. Where's the passenger's voice? Screenshots of Lorraine kneeling on the carpet, gathering her scattered belongings, already circled across Twitter with the hashtag "Say She Deserves a Seat." Within half an hour of the incident, the tag trended regionally, powered not by influencers, but by ordinary voices sharing fragments of outrage. But across another corner of the internet, a different story grew teeth. Claudia Mercer's clipped video, Veronica yanking down the bag, Alan laughing, spread with mocking captions. Know Your Place trended beside Nash. She deserves to see two conflicting narratives dividing feeds into battle lines. Claudia smirked at her screen. Satisfied her followers doubled in minutes, engagement surging. She whispered to herself, "This is content gold inside the cabin." The clash of digital storms echoed into the physical space. Check their feeds. Eyes darting between dueling hashtags. One woman gasped as she read aloud, "They're saying she tried to sneak into first class." Another countered, "No, look at this. Their video she had the ticket. It's right there." Alan Prescott thrived on the confusion. He leaned back with a self-satisfied grin, crossing his legs. "You see, the internet agrees with me. She doesn't belong here. She staged this whole drama to make herself look like a victim." Typical. His words carried stoking murmurs. A man in a gray suit across the aisle muttered, "Maybe he's right." But Evelyn Carter snapped her head toward him, silver hair catching the light. "No, she belongs here. I saw her pass myself. Don't twist the truth." Her voice, aged but sharp, silenced the murmur. Still the division spread. Half the cabin scrolled Claudia's version, nodding with misplaced certainty. The other half watched a mirror stream, their expressions hardening with recognition of something uglier than a seating dispute. The plane itself seemed to split down an invisible line. Skepticism on one side, solidarity on the other. At the rear, Marcus Lee clenched his jaw. He'd glimpsed the flicker of ethics violation. Stand by across the screens. He couldn't unsee it. Whatever Lorraine had done with her device, it had touched the aircraft's systems. He scanned the cabin. Veronica stood tall, but her movements betrayed unease. He knew she felt her authority slipping even as she doubled down. "Attention!" Veronica's voice rang out firm and commanding. "This passenger," she gestured sharply toward Lorraine, "is under review for unauthorized luggage storage and possible seat misrepresentation. Security has been notified." A ripple of gasps and whispers surged through the cabin. Phones tilted upward, recording. Claudia's grin widened. This would make her next clip even juicier. Alan chuckled, savoring every word Veronica spoke. But Air's live stream captured something different. Lorraine, seated in 2A hands, folded calmly on her lap. No protest, no panic, only stillness. The quiet weight of composure under fire. Era whispered into her phone, "Look at her. She isn't yelling. She isn't causing trouble. They're trying to paint her as disruptive. But she hasn't moved except to pick up her things." Jonas Miller scribbled faster, his notepad nearly full. His instincts screamed that history was unfolding. Two narratives, one truth. He caught every word, every contradiction, every flicker of doubt across Veronica's face. The captain's voice crackled overhead. Cabin crew prepared for takeoff, yet no one truly heard it. All attention was locked on Lorraine in the storm swirling around her. Alan leaned forward, voice dripping with contempt. "You should just admit it, lady. You don't belong here. Some people earn their seat, others steal it." His laugh was cruel, echoing across the hush. Evelyn's hand tightened around her armrest. "That's enough," she snapped. "You don't get to talk to her like that." Her words drew scattered applause from a few passengers, but more stayed silent. fearful of picking sides. Veronica ignored Evelyn. She stepped closer to Lorraine's seat, folding her arms. This will be escalated. If you cooperate, perhaps we can resolve this without further embarrassment. Finally, Lorraine lifted her gaze. Her eyes met Veronica's, unwavering, sharp as glass. She did not raise her voice. She did not stand. She simply spoke, her tone low-measured, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had signed contracts worth billions. You think this ends here? The words froze Veronica mid-breath. Alan's grin faltered. Claudia's finger stilled over her phone. Even the passengers who had sided against Lorraine shifted uneasily, sensing that the line had shifted. It was not a question. It was a warning. And though few in the cabin could grasp its full meaning, Jonas Miller did. He felt it in the pit of his stomach, the sense that something vast, something far beyond this aircraft had just been set into motion. Outside the plane, Amamira's live stream crossed 100,000 views. On Twitter, the hashtags #deserves a seat and Know Your Place trended side by side, dueling for dominance. Inside, Lorraine's quiet words lingered in the air, heavier than the engines rumbling to life beneath them. This is Black Stories Unveiled, where the dignity of Black women meets the arrogance of small power. The atmosphere inside the first-class cabin had hardened into something brittle, ready to snap. The two hashtags raging online were mirrored here in real time. Passengers caught between silent complicity and simmering indignation. Phones tilted in every direction. Screens glowed with dueling versions of the truth. The air itself seemed charged, as though the very walls of the aircraft were straining to contain the collision. At the rear, Marcus Lee stepped forward again. His heart thudded against his ribs, not from fear, but from duty. He held Lorraine's boarding pass in his hands, eyes narrowing on the words printed in bold type VIP Tier 1, Sky. He had seen this classification only once during a training seminar that most crew treated as trivia, but Marcus had paid attention. Tier 1 wasn't just a loyalty designation. It was untouchable beyond platinum, beyond ambassador. It meant the passenger wasn't just wealthy. They were entwined with the system itself. He swallowed hard and approached. Lee Lead Hail, he said cautiously to Veronica. This boarding pass. Veronica whipped around, eyes flashing. I've already handled it. Marcus's voice lowered, steady but firm. No, you haven't. Look at this. He held out the pass finger, tapping the designation. Tier 1. For a moment's silence. Veronica's lips parted, but no sound came. She hadn't bothered to read the fine print earlier. She had only seen what she wanted to see. Her authority bristled, now caught in the vice of a truth she hadn't anticipated. Alan Prescott leaned forward, eager to undermine. Tier 1 sounds like nonsense. Probably forged, like I said, some cheap trick to get into first class. He laughed, but the sound was thin now, stripped of its earlier confidence. Evelyn Carter, seated just behind Lorraine, spoke up with the sharpness of experience. That's not forged. I've seen passes like that in my years of flying. You don't fake Tier 1, Fong. You don't even get to look at it unless you belong at the very top. Her words cut through the doubt like a blade, her authority unshakable. Murmurs spread through the cabin. Passengers craned their necks to glimpse the boarding pass in Marcus's hand. Some frowned in confusion, others in dawning realization. The tide of opinion was shifting, but Veronica clung to the last scraps of her control. I don't care what it says, she snapped, her voice louder than she intended. This cabin runs on order, no exceptions. Jonas Miller's pen moved furiously across his notepad. He saw at the exact moment when denial crossed into defiance. When authority stopped serving passengers and started serving itself, he scribbled a line. The truth revealed, but pride refuses to yield. Amamira's live stream caught it too. Her viewers typed in all caps. Zoom in. What does Tier 1 mean? She has the right seat. Why are they lying? Lorraine had remained quiet throughout the exchange, her hands folded neatly on her lap, her gaze calm. Now, as the argument swelled around her, she reached once more into her bag. Her fingers closed around the matte black tablet, and she drew it out with the ease of someone retrieving a pen. She set it gently on the tray table, the glow returning as her thumb unlocked the device. Alan barked a laugh. Oh, look, here we go. She's Googling fake codes now. What's next? A Wikipedia page to prove she's special. But the glow from Lorraine's tablet wasn't a browser. It wasn't anything any ordinary passenger had ever seen. Across its screen, a sequence of encrypted symbols pulsed in slow rhythm, like the heartbeat of a machine. With a single deliberate tap, Lorraine summoned a new screen protocol interface. Marcus's breath caught. He had never seen it live, only in grainy images from technical manuals. His training whispered warnings, only Tier 1 authorized. Do not interfere. He knew instantly what this meant. She wasn't just a VIP passenger. She was wired into the infrastructure itself. Veronica's eyes narrowed, though she didn't understand. To her, it was simply a passenger flaunting technology, undermining her authority in front of a cabin full of witnesses. Her pride screamed louder than her caution. "Put that away," she ordered, her tone sharp, brittle. "Devices like that aren't permitted." Lorraine ignored her. She tapped one more command, slow and unhurried. The words appeared across the screen in pale letters. "Protocol standby." The cabin lights flickered again, a faint pulse running through the aircraft systems. Every seat-back screen glitched for a heartbeat, displaying a ghostly message before returning to the welcome screen. A few passengers gasped, clutching armrests. Someone whispered, "Did you see that Jonas had seen it?" His eyes wide. Amamira had caught it on her live stream, her viewers exploding in the chat. "What was that?" The screens flashed. She did something. Veronica tried to mask her alarm, barking to Marcus, "Check the system." But Marcus's voice was tightened as he replied, "The system's responding to her, not us." Alan, suddenly pale, tried to laugh, but failed. His chuckle was hollow, trembling at the edges. "She's bluffing, just some hacker toy, nothing real." Evelyn Carter leaned forward, her voice low, reverent. "No, that's not a bluff. That's control." Lorraine finally looked up, her gaze sweeping across the cabin. For the first time since the humiliation began, she spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Her voice was calm, steady, but it carried weight that silenced even Alan. "This isn't about a bag. This isn't about a seat. This is about respect, and respect when denied demands a reckoning." Her words hung in the air as the tablet glowed brighter, the letters protocol standby pulsing like a beacon. Passengers shifted uneasily. Some glanced toward the cockpit, others at Veronica, searching for guidance. But no one spoke. No one dared. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone felt it, though they couldn't yet name why. Marcus knew, Jonas suspected. Evelyn sensed it. Oh no. And Amamira's viewers, tens of thousands of them, now watched in real time as a woman, once humiliated in silence, began to reveal that her silence was never weakness. It was the pause before command. The glow of the tablet deepened, and the cabin screens flickered once more. This time the message lingered for 2 full seconds. Ethics violation. Investigation pending. Gasps filled the cabin, and in seat 2A, Dr. Lorraine Whitfield folded her hands once again, as if she had done nothing at all. The cabin was no longer a sealed chamber of silence. It had become a stage, and the world outside was already watching. On Amamira Hassan's phone, the live stream counter ticked past 100,000. Her viewers multiplied by the minute, the comment feed cascading faster than her eyes could follow. "I'm shaking. This is wrong. She's calm because she knows who she is. That attendant needs to be fired immediately. Tag FAA. Tag every news outlet. This can't be hidden." Amamira's own voice cracked slightly as she narrated, but she kept her camera steady. "You're watching this live. This isn't staged." She showed her ticket first-class seat 2A. They still dragged her bag down. They tried to humiliate her. Her breath caught. And she's still sitting here with dignity while they accuse her of lying. Her audience exploded with shares. Within minutes, the clip was reposted to Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook, the hashtag she deserves. The seat rocketed from trending regionally to trending nationwide. Amamira's face flushed as notifications flooded her screen, but she didn't stop recording. She knew instinctively the truth had to be captured without pause. Meanwhile, Claudia Mercer's clip began to crumble under its own weight. She had smirked at her rising views, her mocking caption spreading under "Know Your Place," but the internet is ruthless to liars. A side-by-side comparison emerged almost instantly. Amir's footage showing Lorraine's valid ticket next to Claudia's selective framing. Replies piled up under Claudia's post. You cut the video. Where's the part with her boarding pass? This is malicious editing. Take this down. You're spreading lies. Her notifications turned hostile. Brands she had tagged quietly unlin from her post. Sponsors sent curt emails to distance themselves. Claudia's grin faltered, replaced by a flicker of panic. She typed furiously in her defense. I only filmed what I saw. Don't attack me. But her followers smelled blood. The tide had turned against her. In contrast, Jonas Miller remained deliberate. He had not live-streamed, not edited, not chased clout. Instead, he opened Twitter and typed with the precision of a man who knew the value of credibility. I am on Clear Sky Flight 482 first-class cabin. What you've seen online is true. Of a black woman with a valid Tier 1 ticket was publicly humiliated when her bag was yanked down. I saw the boarding pass myself. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is discrimination. He hit post. Within minutes, his tweet was shared thousands of times, screenshotted onto Instagram stories, quoted by journalists already circling the trending hashtags. His words carried the weight Claudia's lacked. He was a witness, not an opportunist, and his thread was only beginning. Inside the cabin, the ripple of tension sharpened. Veronica Hale stood stiff near Lorraine's seat, her authority bleeding out in front of passengers, cameras, and now millions online. Her jaw clenched, but still she clung to control. Security will deal with this, she muttered, but even she sounded less certain now. Alan Prescott, though pale from the earlier revelation of Tier 1, tried to regain bravado. You people are gullible, he scoffed. Anyone can make a fancy pass in an Appglow Blue. It's all theater. She's just another fraud looking for sympathy. But the conviction in his voice had cracked, and passengers noticed. Evelyn Carter leaned forward, silver hair gleaming in the overhead light. Her tone carried quiet authority. You don't understand what you're witnessing, she told Alan, but her words were for everyone. That designation, that tablet, those aren't toys. That's power you don't laugh at. Lorraine sat unmoved, her tablet resting on the tray before her. The screen glowed softly, pulsing with restrained energy. Protocol standby. The letters waited patient as a predator before the strike. She tapped her fingers once against the edge, then entered a sequence of commands. The screen shifted. Engage Tier 1 ethics alert. The cabin lights flickered again, longer this time. Every seatback monitor flashed simultaneously, not with entertainment menus, but with a stark white message. Ethics violation. Investigation initiated. Passengers gasped. A man dropped his phone. A woman clutched her child's hand. The message lingered, impossible to ignore, before disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. Veronica staggered back a step, color draining from her face. What? What did you just do? Her voice cracked, fear threading through the edges. Marcus Lee had seen it too. His chest tightened, but not from fear, from recognition. He remembered the training module. Tier 1 passengers have authority to trigger direct Skylink reviews in real time. This action supersedes crew command. It wasn't folklore, it was policy, and Lorraine had just pulled the trigger. Amamira's viewers saw it happen live. Her feet erupted, the screens flashed. What does ethics violation mean? She has control over the system? Alan tried one last laugh, weak and wavering. Some glitch planes flicker all the time, but his knuckles whitened around his phone as stock tickers flashed red, Clear Sky shares dipping news alerts buzzing with headlines. Incident aboard Flight 482 sparked Skyink investigation. Jonas typed another update. Every passenger saw it. The in-flight system displayed ethics violation. Investigation initiated. This is unprecedented. Skylink is involved. This is no glitch. His tweet detonated across timelines, quoted by journalists, retweeted by politicians, amplified by activists. Veronica tried to speak, but the weight of silence pressed against her throat. Rain turned her gaze toward her, calm, steady, unflinching. Her voice, quiet yet unyielding, carried across the cabin. This isn't theater. This isn't a performance. This is accountability, and accountability has no off switch. Her words hung heavy, undeniable. The passengers, the crew, the millions watching online, they all felt the truth settle like gravity. Something irreversible had begun. The tablet glowed brighter. The command confirmed. A chime echoed faintly from the cabin speakers, not from the crew, not from the cockpit, but from Skylink itself. Protocol was no longer on standby. It was alive. The shockwave didn't stay inside the cabin. It rippled outward, carried by signals, networks, and protocols woven so tightly into aviation that one flicker in a seatback monitor could shiver across continents. Inside the plane, passengers murmured in confusion. But far above their heads, satellite feeds had already registered the trigger. Deep in the operations hub of Skylink, red alerts bloomed across screens. What had started as humiliation in a cabin was now a systemic event. At FAA Command Center in Washington, the night shift was halfway through coffee when alarms began to chime. Priority flag Tier 1 activation. A technician muttered, disbelief etched across his face. Lights on the board shifted from green to amber, then to red. Within minutes, dispatchers scrambled to reroute traffic. Across the eastern seaboard, 20 aircraft were instructed to hold positions on tarmac, engines idling. In Europe, a dozen flights inbound were ordered to circle. And in Asia, controllers received coded advisories, delayed departures until further notice. In total, 40 flights halted in their tracks, passengers staring at departure boards that suddenly flickered with the word delayed. Confusion reigned. Pilots radioed in, "Why is Skylink holding us?" Airport lounges buzzed with restless complaints. Travelers pulled out phones, venting online about canceled meetings, missed weddings, ruined holidays. Hashtags sprouted like weeds. Ash Skylink glitch. Ash grounded again. Sat delay day. No one knew yet what had triggered it. It only that something vast and invisible was pressing pause on the skies. At Clear Sky Airlines headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel overlooking the city. The operations floor was chaos. Monitors filled with flight maps now blinked with error codes. Staff huddled over keyboards, muttering into headsets. At the center of it all, Victor Ramos, the 45-year-old director of operations, barked orders. His suit jacket was off sleeves, rolled up tie, hanging loose. Sweat beatated his forehead, despite the cool hum of the air conditioning. "What's happening?" an assistant stammered, holding out a tablet filled with blinking red notifications. Victor snatched at eye scanning. The words chilled him. Tier 1 ethics violation triggered. Pending review. He cursed under his breath. He knew exactly what it meant. And he knew, too, that if this reached the board before he could control the narrative, his career was over. "Shut it down internally," he ordered. "This doesn't leave this room. Tell the crews it's a temporary systems glitch. Hold them quiet until I give word." "But Sir, FAA is already pinging us, staffer," said voice quivering. "They want confirmation on the Tier 1 activation." "Tell them it's a false alarm," Victor snapped. "Some idiot passenger must have spoofed the system. We're not feeding panic." His words rang hollow even to himself. Tier 1 wasn't spoofed. It couldn't be. He had sat in the same secret briefings years ago, how a handful of individuals, corporate architects tied to Skylink, were given authority to override normal operations. He had hoped he'd never see it happen in his career, and now it had. Across the world, ripple effects deepened. A family in New York missed their connecting flight to London, venting at staff behind counters who had no answers. In Paris, an airport cafe filled with stranded travelers watched the departure board wipe itself into rows of delayed. In Tokyo, news anchors broke into regular programming. Unprecedented delays ripple across multiple airlines, cause unknown. Inside the cabin of Flight 482, Lorraine sat silent, as though she hadn't just sent tremors through the global system. Veronica hovered nearby, face pale, fighting to cling to control. Alan kept glancing at his phone, his bravado fading with every headline about Skylink outages. Evelyn whispered a prayer under her breath. Amamira's live stream counter ticked higher. Her viewers are now spamming, flights are being delayed everywhere. This is connected. She's behind it. She's powerful. Jonas read the same alerts on his phone, his hands trembling. He typed a new tweet, confirmed FAA and Skylink experiencing delays after Tier 1 activation. 40 flights impacted. This is not contained to one plane. His words sent another shock wave picked up by journalists hungry for confirmation. Back at Clear Sky HQ, Victor's assistant whispered, "Sir, CNN is calling. They want a statement." Victor clenched his fists. "Ignore them. No press, no leaks. We fix this quietly." But as he turned, he saw the wall of screens behind him. The maps pulsed with red. Numbers climbed, and then one central monitor shifted, blacking out all other data. 4 words appeared stark white against black ethics lock engaged. The room froze. Staffers stopped typing. Headsets slipped from hands. Even Victor's breath caught in his throat. He had wanted to contain it, to spin it, to bury it under excuses. But the system had made its decision, and no human command could override it now. Somewhere thousands of feet above a woman in seat 2A had pressed a button, and down on Earth, the skies themselves had obeyed. On every screen in Clear Sky headquarters, the words blazed brighter, impossible to ignore. Ethics lock. The newsroom lights burned late into the night. In New York, anchors at CNN broke into regular programming, their voices tense as graphics blared across the bottom of the screen. Breaking news, Skylink activates ethics lock. Dozens of flights delayed. Footage poured in from airports around the world. Passengers milling in confusion. Departure boards flashing red with cancellations. Crews scrambling to explain what they didn't understand themselves. We're following a developing story tonight. The anchor in tone, a mysterious disruption in the global air traffic system, has delayed at least 40 flights across multiple continents. The FAA has confirmed it is investigating an unprecedented Tier 1 activation. At CNBC, analysts leaned over screens, their voices urgent. Shares of Clear Sky Airlines are plummeting in after hours, trading one reported eyes, scanning the chart, nosediving in real time. The market hasn't seen a disruption of this magnitude in years. This is bigger than a glitch. Investors want answers. The camera cut to a board showing airlines in red across the globe. Every carrier tied to Skylink is being impacted. This is systemic. In his office at Clear Sky headquarters, Victor Ramos slammed his fist against the desk. Calls poured in, FAA demanding updates. Shareholders, furious, media desperate for a quote. Assistants hovered at the door, uncertain whether to enter. "Tell them nothing," he barked. "This is temporary. It's a systems malfunction. Do not confirm anything." His staff exchanged uneasy glances. They knew what he wouldn't admit. The words ethics lock glowed on every operation screen, a command no one at HQ could override. Every second it remained, the company's reputation bled. Phones buzzed with alerts, hashtags multiplying, journalists digging, regulators circling like hawks. Victor tugged at his tie, sweat dampening his collar. "I'll handle this," he muttered, though the quaver in his voice betrayed doubt. "We control the message. We control the narrative." But even as he spoke, control was slipping. On the other side of the city, bright studio lights flickered on. Claudia Mercer, dressed in a polished cream blazer, sat across from a talk show host at a late-night news panel. She adjusted her hair nervously, but forced a smile. The host leaned forward. "You were on that flight tonight, correct? And you posted a video of the incident." Claudia nodded quickly. "Yes, I captured what really happened. A woman, she looked like she didn't belong in first class, was trying to sneak her bag into overhead space. The crew stopped her, as they should. People are blowing this out of proportion." The host arched an eyebrow. "But other footage shows she had a valid ticket, a Tier 1 designation, in fact." "Did you omit that?" Claudia's smile faltered. I just filmed what I saw. I can't help what people choose to believe." The panel erupted with pushback. One commentator shook his head. "That's selective editing. You framed a black woman as an imposter when she had every right to that seat. That's not just careless, that's harmful." On social media, clips of Claudia's interview went viral instantly, viewers slamming her tone-deaf defense. Sponsors issued statements, cutting ties. Within an hour, her credibility unraveled on live television. Back at Clear Sky HQ, Victor's phone rang again. It was the CEO. His face blanched as he listened. "Yes, I understand," he said quietly, eyes locked on the glowing monitors behind him. "I'll fix this. I promise." But promises meant little when the entire world was watching screens filled with the same damning words. Assistants whispered outside his door. "CNN just called it a global disruption. CNBC says billions are evaporating. He can't spin this anymore. Victor shoved the door shut, desperate to block out the noise. Yet the truth seeped through every wall in airport terminals across the globe. Passengers shouted at counters demanding answers. Children cried in chairs. Businessmen cursed into phones. Couples slumped against luggage. A woman in Los Angeles streamed live. Every single flight says delayed. They're telling us it's Skylink. Does anyone know what's happening? In London, a father missing his daughter's wedding held up his boarding pass to the camera voice, trembling with rage. They locked the skies. I don't even know why. Who has that kind of power? The answer, though they didn't know it yet, was sitting quietly in seat 2A of Flight 482. In the cabin, the passengers felt the shift as news alerts pinged their devices. Some gasped, others muttered curses. Alan Prescott grew pale, scrolling through his stock portfolio as losses deepened by the second. His earlier arrogance drained away, replaced by panic. Evelyn Carter shook her head, whispering to herself. She warned them. They didn't listen. Veronica Hale stood rigid at the aisle, her authority hollow now, her threats meaningless. Every eye darted back to Lorraine, still calm, still silent, as though she were the eye of the storm. Jonas Miller's phone buzzed with a call from an editor he hadn't spoken to in years. Is it true? The voice demanded. Are you there? Are you seeing this? Jonas glanced at Lorraine, her tablet glowing faintly. He steadied his voice. Yes, and it's only beginning. He ended the call and began typing his thread, unfolding line by line, carrying the story further than any broadcast could reach. The pressure mounted in Victor Ramos's office. Staff crowded outside his glass walls, whispering as alerts cascaded. CNN flashed breaking banners. FAA confirms multiple airlines impacted by Tier 1 activation. CNBC cut back to a chart of free-falling stocks analysts debating whether this was the largest aviation disruption since 9/11. Victor's phone rang again, this time not from a superior, but from a regulator. His hand trembled as he lifted it. This is Victor. A voice cold as steel replied. Do not lie to us. We saw the activation. We saw the lock. You have 24 hours to respond or Clear Sky will face federal review. Victor's knees buckled as the line went dead, and then came the final blow. A live feed cut in on every major network, a reporter standing outside JFK International. Wind whipping through her hair, eyes wide as she held her microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, she said into the camera, her voice rising above the roar of stranded passengers behind her. We've just received confirmation. This is not regional. This is not limited. Flights are grounded worldwide. The words struck like a hammer. Anchors fell silent. Markets reeled. Viewers at home gasped. The skies, for the first time in modern memory, had frozen. Inside Flight 482, Lorraine Whitfield closed her tablet and rested it on her lap. She did not smile. She did not speak. But in the silence of her composure, everyone in the cabin understood nothing about this night would ever return to normal. The reporter's words echoed on screens around the world. Flights grounded worldwide. The world above the clouds had always been ruled by timings, precision, and the steady heartbeat of engines. Planes lifted, planes landed, all orchestrated by invisible hands in towers and control rooms. But tonight, the rhythm faltered. Tonight, one woman's touch had rewritten the schedule of the skies. Inside the cabin of Flight 482, the atmosphere had shifted into something uncanny. Every passenger had seen the seatback monitors flicker. They had read the words, ethics violation, investigation initiated, and now every device in their hands buzzed with alerts from the ground flights delayed, departure suspended, airlines collapsing, and after-hours trading. The air was heavy with disbelief. Lorraine Whitfield sat perfectly still, the black tablet glowing faintly against her lap. Her fingers hovered for a moment, then pressed the confirmation sequence. The screen pulsed once, then filled with stark white letters. Tier. One ethics lock confirmed. The plane itself seemed to shudder. Passengers glanced nervously at the lights above them, at the attendants frozen mid-step. In towers across continents, controllers stared at their monitors as flight after flight turned red. 1, then 5, then 50. In less than 3 minutes, 190 aircraft across the globe were locked in place, held on runways, circling in skies. denied clearance to proceed. The cost was astronomical, the disruption unimaginable. Inside the cabin, no one spoke at first. The only sounds were the muted hum of engines and the distant tapping of passengers refreshing news feeds on their phones. Then the first headlines appeared. Skylink ethics lock freezes 190 flights. $4 billion to risk in dollars over 24 hours. Alan Prescott's hand trembled as he opened his stock app. His face drained of color. Clear Sky Airlines, the company he proudly tied his wealth to, was in free fall. The chart nosedived, red arrows plunging like knives. Millions evaporated from his portfolio in real time. He swiped desperately, searching for reassurance. But the numbers only sank deeper. A sound escaped him, a choked laugh that turned into a gasp. This can't be real. Passengers turned to look at him, the man who had mocked Lorraine only hours before. His arrogance was gone, stripped, replaced by sweat beating at his temples and hands that shook uncontrollably. It's temporary, he muttered to no one in particular. Just a glitch. Stocks bounce back. They always bounce back. But his eyes betrayed him. He knew. This wasn't a glitch. This was deliberate. Evelyn Carter sat straighter, her silver hair catching the dim cabin light. Her voice carried with quiet certainty. She warned you, she said, though her words seemed aimed at Alan, at Veronica, at anyone who had doubted. She told you this wasn't about a bank, and now the world knows it too. Veronica Hale clenched her fists, trying to salvage her authority. You can't do this, she hissed at Lorraine. You don't have the right. But her voice faltered. Even she knew how hollow it sounded now. The monitors had spoken. The headlines were undeniable. Amir Hassan's phone buzzed nonstop as her live stream soared past 2 million views. Viewers spammed the chat. She froze the skies. This woman has power over the entire system. Who is she? Amira's voice shook as she whispered into the camera. She's not just a passenger. She's someone the airlines answer to, and you're watching it happen in real time. Jonas Miller scribbled furiously in his notebook, then typed into his phone. His words crisp, undeniable. Confirmed Tier 1 ethics. Lock engaged. 190 flights frozen. Market estimates, 4 loss in 24 hours. Passenger at center remains unidentified publicly, but I was there. Her name is Dr. Lorraine Whitfield. His tweets spread like wildfire, picked up by every news desk in America within minutes. Alan pressed his phone closer to his face, muttering curses. His investments weren't just numbers. They were leveraged status, the reason he had laughed so freely at others. And now those digits bled red, and with them went his composure. He slumped back, hands gripping his hair, rocking slightly as though denial could hold the collapse at bay. The rest of the cabin watched in stunned silence. Passengers who had smirked earlier now averted their eyes in shame. Those who had doubted whispered to one another. She's someone important, more than important. She's one of the architects. The word traveled like a secret breaking free, spreading from row to row. Architect, a title reserved for the handful of minds who had built Skylink itself. Lorraine finally lifted her gaze. She didn't speak to Alan. She didn't address Veronica. She looked out the window, the city lights far below, blinking in scattered clusters. Her reflection stared back at her, composed, unyielding. The skies had bent to her will, and she carried the weight of that truth with quiet dignity. In control rooms across the world, managers shouted into headsets, "What's happening? Who authorized this? Can we override?" The answer came back the same each time. Number Tier 1 lock is absolute. Panic spread across the industry. Executives phoning one another in desperation, politicians demanding answers, journalists filling broadcasts with speculation. But in the first-class cabin of Flight 482, Lorraine remained silent. She didn't need to explain herself. The system spoke for her. The halted flights, the plunging stocks, the headlines screaming across the globe. These were her words, her response to humiliation. Alan buried his face in his hands. A passenger behind him whispered, "Is he crying?" The arrogance had melted into something smaller, something pitiful. The man who had laughed at a woman picking up her family photo from the floor now wept as his empire crumbled on a glowing screen. Veronica stood frozen, her authority shattered at her voice. Lost. Evelyn looked at Lorraine with something like awe. Amamira held her phone steady, whispering to millions. She froze. 190 flights. She froze the world. Jonas's pen still as he realized he was no longer just recording history. He was inside its beating heart. And Lorraine, she placed the tablet back into her bag, zipped it shut, and folded her hands once more as though she had done nothing at all. But every passenger knew the truth. Nothing would fly tonight without her permission. On every news channel, the same headline blazed $4 billion lost in 24 hours as Skylink lock freezes 190 flights. And in seat 2A, a Dr. Lorraine Whitfield sat calm, silent, and utterly unshaken. The cabin felt like the center of the world now, a chamber where silence throbbed with realization. The news alerts on passengers' phones stacked one on top of another. Ford Bard lost in 24 hours. Skylink ethics lock activated global flights. Frozen eyes flicked between glowing screens, and the woman seated in 2A. Her posture regal, her face calm, her hands folded as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But the extraordinary was undeniable. A man in row 3 leaned towards his neighbor, whispering, "She's not just some executive. She's tier 1. That's not a status you buy. That's structural. That's foundational." His words spread backward, repeated in hushed tones across the cabin. Foundational architect, one of them. Evelyn Carter nodded slowly, as if confirming what the others dared to suspect. Her voice carried low but steady. "I remember the articles years ago when Skylink was first announced. There were 3 names behind it. 3 architects who built a system that links every airline to the FAA. I remember one of them was a woman, a black woman, Lorraine Whitfield. She said the name with reverence as though uncovering a secret hidden in plain sight. Gasps rippled across the rows. Passengers craned their necks, staring at Lorraine with new eyes. Not as a humiliated traveler, not as a wronged woman in C2A, but as one of the creators of the very system now bringing the skies to their knees. Alan Prescott lifted his head, face pale, eyes wide with the dawning horror of recognition. "No," he muttered, shaking his head as though denial could reverse what he now understood. "No, it can't be her. She wouldn't be on this flight. She wouldn't." His voice cracked, his trembling fingers tightened around his phone as the red numbers on his stocks bled further down the screen. For once, there was no laughter, only fear. Amamira Hassan's live stream caught every second. She whispered into the mic, her voice trembling with awe. "Her name is Dr. Lorraine Whitfield. She's not just a CEO. She's one of the architects of Skylink. The system you're seeing on the news, she helped build it, and now she's using it." Her chat exploded, viewers spamming the feed. "This is history. She froze the skies. She built #SkyJustice now." The hashtag surged past 1 million, then 2. Trending lists filled with variations. Sky Justice Whitfield ethics lock. She deserves a seat." Activists tweeted, celebrities reshared. Politicians issued cautious statements. Screens across the world carried Lorraine's face from grainy passenger clips. Her calmness under fire framed against Veronica's sharp gestures and Alan's mocking laugh. The contrast was undeniable: dignity against contempt, authority against arrogance. Jonas Miller's thread cut through the noise with precision. Confirmed passenger is Dr. Lorraine Whitfield, co-architect of Skylink. She has exercised Tier 1 authority to freeze flights after discriminatory treatment aboard Clear Sky Flight 482. "This is not rumor. I am here. I witnessed everything." The tweet detonated across platforms quoted by CNN, BBC, and the Washington Post within minutes. Back at Clear Sky headquarters, Victor Ramos slammed his desk again, sweat dripping down his temples. "Get me her profile," he barked. An assistant scurried forward with a tablet, Lorraine's biography glowing on screen. Victor scanned it, his stomach twisting. Harvard Economics Wall Street ascent, founder of Whitfield Capital, board member of Global Regulators, and yes, one of the 3 architects of Skylink. The reality was undeniable. "God help us," he muttered. "She owns the rails we're running on." In the cabin, the shift was palpable. Where once there had been snickers, doubt, disdain, now there was hushed respect, even awe. Passengers adjusted their posture as though embarrassed to have ever sat in judgment. The same people who had looked away when her bag spilled now leaned forward, desperate to glimpse her face to be part of this moment. Evelyn Carter placed a hand gently over her heart. "I should have known," she whispered. "That composure, that strength. It's the same steel I saw in captains when storms hit. She carries storms inside her and bends them." Veronica Hale stood rigid, her authority shattered. She opened her mouth to protest, to reclaim some shred of a command, but no words came. The passengers weren't looking at her anymore. They weren't even listening. The spotlight of attention of history had shifted irrevocably to Lorraine. Alan fumbled his phone, slipping from his hands, clattering to the floor. He bent to retrieve it, but the chart flashing red brought no comfort. His wealth, his identity, his arrogance. It was all bleeding away at the mercy of the woman he had mocked. He looked up, his eyes wild, his voice pleading. "Stop this. Please, you can stop this." But Lorraine didn't turn to him. She didn't need to. She adjusted the sleeve of her blazer, smoothed the fabric with delicate precision, and then reached once more for the tablet. The glow returned soft but inexorable. She tapped a final command. The letters pulsed, lock confirmed system-wide. The cabin screens flickered again. Passengers held their breath. A unified message spread across every seat back. "Ethics lock, all operations frozen pending review." Gasps erupted. Phones buzzed with breaking news alerts. CNBC flashed live. Market hit by cascading sell-off as Skylink freeze expands. Estimated losses surpass $4 billion. CNN anchors their faces. Grape repeated Jonas's words. "She's one of the architects. She has authority to do this." Emma Mira's voice cracked as she spoke into her stream. "You just watched it." She confirmed the lock. "This isn't rumor. This is real." Her viewers poured in their comments, exploding. "She's rewriting history. This is justice. They humiliated her. Now the world feels the weight." Jonas looked up from his screen pen, falling still. His voice was almost reverent as he murmured to himself, "This is the line, the before and after. Nothing in aviation will be the same." Lorraine finally exhaled, slow and measured. She closed the tablet, slid it into her bag, and rested her hands calmly in her lap. For the first time since the humiliation began, she allowed herself to speak words meant for more than just one person. Her voice was low, steady, cutting through the charged silence. "Now they'll listen." The cabin seemed to freeze around her, as though every passenger felt the weight of those words that settle into their bones. For they knew she wasn't talking about this flight anymore. She was talking about an entire industry, an entire world forced at last to hear the voice of the woman they had tried to silence. Outside the news cycle, roared hashtags spiraled past 2 million, and the world's skies remained still. But inside, Satua Lorraine Whitfield sat serene, her whisper echoing louder than any headline. Now they'll listen. In Washington, the quarters of the Federal Aviation Administration buzzed like a shaken hive. Phones rang without pause, printers spat out fresh reports, and monitors glowed with maps littered in red. The Tier 1 ethics lock had been confirmed, and for the first time in decades, the FAA itself was caught off guard by a system it was meant to oversee. Inside a windowless command room, officials gathered around a long table, their faces grim under fluorescent lights. "This is no glitch," the deputy administrator said flatly, slapping a stack of papers onto the table. "We're dealing with a verified Tier 1 activation, 190 flights grounded, 4 billion lost in under a day." His voice dropped lower, almost incredulous, and it originated from a passenger cabin. An older director rubbed his temples, his voice shaking. "Do we know who authorized it?" The deputy administrator looked up. Dr. Lorraine Whitfield, Skylink co-architect. She triggered the lock personally aboard Clear Sky Flight 482. Gas broke out around the room. Some cursed under their breath. Others simply stared, stunned that a name long buried in corporate corridors had resurfaced so explosively. "We'll need a global response," another official muttered. "This isn't about one airline anymore. This is about trust in the system itself. If the architects are pulling triggers, every carrier on Earth is implicated." Heads nodded grimly. Plans for hearings, for reviews, for an international summit began forming in hurried notes. Meanwhile, on CNN, anchors spoke over live footage of airports filled with stranded travelers. We're seeing scenes of confusion across the United States and abroad. The FAA has confirmed it is working directly with Skylink after a rare ethics lock was triggered by Dr. Lorraine Whitfield, a name many of you may not know, but one that carries enormous weight in the aviation industry. She is in fact one of the three original architects of the Skylink system, the digital backbone connecting airlines and regulators worldwide. The anchor paused as a video clip rolled Lorraine seated calmly in two-way passengers, staring in shock, her hands folded neatly as if she were untouchable. Across the Atlantic, BBC World News ran the same story. Their anchor's tone was clip-oot but urgent. This is no longer an American crisis. Flights across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East are affected. The freeze, now called the Whitfield Lock by some analysts, has caused ripple effects far beyond air travel. Markets are reacting violently. Governments are seeking answers, and passengers everywhere are demanding to know why one woman was forced to exercise such power in the first place. Inside Flight 482, phones continued to buzz. Passengers read headlines in real time, their eyes wide, their voices hushed. Alan Prescott hunched low, his hands shaking over his useless portfolio. Veronica Hale remained stiff in the aisle, her authority now reduced to silence. And Marcus Lee, the young security officer, felt every eye on him as messages poured into his own device. Unbeknownst to him, his name was trending too. Clips of him inspecting Lorraine's boarding pass had surfaced. His quiet words overheard by Amamira's livestream, "This is Tier 1. That single confirmation had become proof of truth, a validation that the world clung to amid the chaos. Twitter threads hailed him as the one who refused to lie, the whistleblower inside the cabin. On LinkedIn, professionals praised his integrity. Marcus Lee stood for the truth even when his superior tried to bury it. Overnight, a young officer had become the unexpected face of honesty in an industry drowning in denial. Back at Clear Sky headquarters, Victor Ramos buried his face in his hands. Every attempt to contain the story had collapsed. FAA officials demanded answers he could not give. CNN panels were dissecting his company's every move. Shareholders threatened lawsuits. And now the narrative was no longer just about Lorraine. It was about systemic rot, about crew culture, about arrogance at every level. His phone buzzed with a message from legal counsel. "Prepare for board review. You may be named directly." Victor closed his eyes, the walls of his office, pressing inward. In the cabin, Evelyn Carter adjusted her scarf, her silver hair gleaming under the dim lights. She had been silent for a while, watching as the world shifted outside the window. But now her phone buzzed with a message from a colleague she hadn't spoken to in years. "BBC wants your voice. They saw you in the footage. They want to hear from a veteran who knows what service means." Evelyn's breath caught. She had retired with dignity, proud of her 30 years in the skies. And tonight she had witnessed humiliation, cruelty, and finally justice beginning to unfold. Her voice, she realized, could carry weight in this moment. At the same time, BBC rolled another clip, Veronica yanking Lorraine's bag down, documents scattering, Alan laughing. The anchor's voice cut in. This is what sparked it all. A moment of humiliation, seen now by millions, that exposed deeper issues of bias and arrogance in the skies. One witness to that moment was Evelyn Carter, a retired flight attendant with 30 years of service. She joins us now. The camera cut to Evelyn's face, her silver hair framing eyes that carried decades of experience. Her lips parted to speak. Passengers in the cabin turned toward her, realizing her words would soon be broadcast to the entire world. On screens everywhere, Evelyn leaned forward into the camera, her voice about to echo far beyond the cabin, carried across the globe by BBC. At Clear Sky Airlines headquarters, the glass walls of Victor Ramos's office reflected nothing but red screens. Flight maps blinked with frozen icons. Financial dashboards showed losses multiplying, and urgent emails filled every corner of his inbox. He had always believed crisis could be spun, that the right words could buy time, but the Tier 1 ethics lock had stripped him of that illusion. Two federal investigators arrived before midnight, their badges gleaming under the sterile lights. They didn't ask permission. They walked straight in. "Mr. Ramos, we're here under directive from the FAA in the Department of Transportation." And one of them said, You're under review for attempted concealment of a Tier 1 activation. We have internal emails showing you ordered staff to classify this as a temporary glitch. Do you deny it?" Victor's mouth went dry. He looked around at his team, who avoided his eyes. Betrayal was written across their silence. The investigator leaned closer. "This isn't about you anymore. This is about systemic arrogance, the culture of denial. But you'll answer for your part. Cameras outside headquarters already broadcasted the image of him, cornered, shoulders slumped. His earlier bravado dissolved. The man who had sworn we control the message was now the message itself, a cautionary tale of failure at the top. Elsewhere, Claudia Mercer scrolled through her phone in horror. Her appearance on the talk show had gone viral for all the wrong reasons. Clips of her smirking defense were spliced next to Emma Mira's livestream. The contrast devastating. Sponsors who once courted her began releasing statements. "We do not condone misrepresentation or bias. Effective immediately, our partnership with Claudia Mercer has ended." Emails flooded in, contracts terminated, deals dissolved. Her follower count plummeted as fast as Clear Sky stock. The internet that once fed her influence now chewed it apart without mercy. She buried her face in her hands, realizing her chase for views had cost her everything. On BBC, the camera framed Evelyn Carter, her silver hair catching the studio lights, her expression firm with quiet dignity. The anchor leaned forward. "Evelyn, you spent 3 decades as a flight attendant. You saw what happened tonight. Tell us, what does this moment mean?" Evelyn drew a breath, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "It means the silence is broken. For years, too many in this industry have looked away when passengers were demeaned, when bias disguised itself as procedure, when dignity was treated as optional. Tonight, the world saw it happen. And tonight, the world saw it answered. Dr. Whitfield didn't just freeze planes. She forced us all to stop and ask why humiliation was allowed to take off in the first place. Her words rippled across airwaves carried into living rooms, boardrooms, and political halls. Flight crews nodded silently as they watched, many whispering, "She speaks for us." Passengers shared her clip with captions like, "Finally a voice of truth." And young attendants scrolling on their breaks felt something stir inside them, a belief that dignity could be defended. Back in Washington, the crisis moved from control rooms to political chambers. A late-night press conference lit up with cameras as Senator David Rollins, known for his fiery rhetoric, stepped to the podium. This isn't about one flight. This isn't about one airline. This is about a culture of arrogance and bias that has poisoned air travel for decades. A woman who helped build the system was treated like she didn't belong in the very cabin she paid for. And only by freezing the skies did she make the industry listen. That is unacceptable. His fist struck the podium. We need global reform, not tomorrow, not after another scandal. Now we will convene hearings. We will hold every airline accountable, and we will rewrite the rules so dignity is never treated as contraband again. His words electrified the room. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes filled the air, but the message had already landed. Around the world, headlines erupted. U.S. Senator demands global aviation reform after Whitfield lock. From humiliation to hearing the skies on trial on Flight 482, passengers watched the news unfold in real time. Phones buzz, faces lit by the glow of global coverage. Alan Prescott sat hollow-eyed, the weight of billions slipping away. Veronica Hale shifted uneasily, her authority reduced to a cautionary tale on every screen. Marcus Lee's name appeared in headlines beside phrases like "integrity under fire" and "the officer who spoke the truth." Amamira's live stream soared past 3 million views, her voice breaking as she whispered, "The world is changing because of what happened here." And Lorraine Whitfield, still seated in 2A, closed her eyes for a moment. Not to rest, but to feel the shift. The lock wasn't just on flights, it was on history forcing the world to pause, reflect, and confront itself. The humiliation that began with a bag yanked from the overhead bin had grown into a reckoning with an entire industry. On BBC, Evelyn Carter's voice carried into millions of homes. Dignity must never be optional. And in Washington, Senator Rollins' words echoed the same demand. Global reform starts now. At Black Stories Unveiled, power reveals itself not with noise but with precision. The hearing room was silent except for the shuffle of papers and the distant clicks of cameras. Rows of journalists filled the back, their pens ready, their lenses trained forward. At the long wooden table, a single chair sat waiting, and when Veronica Hale entered, flanked by airline attorneys who avoided the gaze of the public, the silence thickened into something heavier than shame. She looked smaller now, her once crisp uniform replaced by a plain navy suit. The arrogance she had carried in the aisle of Flight 482 was gone, eroded by the weight of exposure. Screens above the chamber replayed the video again the moment she yanked the bag down the paper, scattering the laughter echoing. It played on loop as evidence. Each rotation a reminder that arrogance has consequences. The chair of the disciplinary board leaned forward. "Ms. Hale," he began, his voice even, but edged with steel. "Do you understand why you are here today?" Veronica's throat bobbed. "Yes," she whispered. "You are charged with professional misconduct, discriminatory treatment of a passenger, and abuse of authority in the execution of your duties. How do you plead?" Her lawyer shuffled, whispering frantically, but Veronica raised her head. The bravado was gone, but a thin thread of defiance remained. "I was following procedure. The chair cut her off. "Procedure does not grant humiliation. Procedure does not strip dignity from a passenger, much less a Tier 1 board member, of the very system you serve." The words struck hard. Veronica flinched. Cameras clicked. The silence stretched, broken only by the scribbling of reporters capturing her downfall in ink. In the gallery, Jonas Miller sat with his notebook open, his live feed already rolling. His voice was calm, measured, but filled with the gravity of the moment. "For those just joining him," he said softly into his microphone, "we are witnessing the official disciplinary hearing of Veronica Hale, the flight attendant, whose actions sparked the global Skylink ethics lock. This is history unfolding in real time. Already the industry is preparing for sweeping reform, and reform was indeed on the horizon. In another wing of the building, executives and regulators from airlines across the globe gathered around polished tables. Papers were being signed, stamps pressed onto documents, signatures scrolled in ink heavy with consequence. The Ethics Compliance Accord was no longer a proposal. It was law in the making. Every airline, every pilot, every crew member would now be bound by a universal code dignity. First respect, non-negotiable bias, treated as a violation equal to safety breaches. News tickers rolled across CNN Ethics Accord signed. Industry to face mandatory integrity reviews. BBC anchors repeated the words with solemnity. For the first time in aviation history, an entire industry has been forced to codify respect as part of its core operating protocol. Back inside the chamber, Veronica's verdict was read. Effective immediately, you are terminated from your position. You are barred from employment in any capacity tied to passenger service. Your name will be entered into the industry-wide database under disciplinary status. Gasps rippled through the audience. Veronica's shoulders sagged, her face pale. This was not suspension. This was exile. Jonas's voice captured the moment. It is official. He reported that Veronica Hale has been removed from her position. More importantly, today marks the signing of the Ethics Compliance Accord, binding the entire industry to standards that should have existed long ago. This is not just a punishment of one, it is a reckoning for all. Screens replayed Evelyn Carter's earlier words on BBC, her voice steady as she said, "Dignity must never be optional." The resonance of her statement echoed here, woven into the Accord's language, immortalized in the text regulator signed. One woman's courage had become a principle for millions. Outside crowds gathered near the courthouse steps, holding signs that read, "Ash Sky Justice had dignity." First, Renasher, Whitfield Lock. Some carried printouts of Lorraine's face from the viral clips, her calm composure becoming an icon of resistance against arrogance. Chants rose not in anger alone, but in affirmation. Respect the skies. Respect the skies. Jonas closed his notebook slowly. He looked up at the cameras and whispered for his live audience. The woman in C2A said 4 words. Now they'll listen. And tonight they did. They listened and they signed. As the crowd's chants swelled outside and reporters raced to file their stories, the camera inside the chamber lingered one last time on Veronica's face. Ashen defeated eclipsed. Justice had not only been served, it had been written into law. The headlines did not stop after Veronica Hale's dismissal. They multiplied, each one dragging another name into the light. By morning, the focus had shifted to the men in the boardrooms who had laughed while the skies collapsed, and no name burned brighter in the furnace of outrage than Alan Prescott. He had been a fixture in the finance world for decades, his face familiar on business magazines, his smirk known in corporate quarters. But the clip of him, laughing, eyes glinting, voice sneering, guess she thought she was important, had become the most replayed 10 seconds of his life. It spread faster than any market analysis he had ever given, and it destroyed him more efficiently than any hostile takeover. The board of his investment firm convened in an emergency session. Cameras caught their exit hours later, expressions grim. A single statement was read aloud. Effective immediately, Alan Prescott has been removed from the board of directors. His comments aboard Clear Sky Flight 482 are incompatible with our values and our obligations to clients. Alan sat alone in his apartment that night, Teucin phone buzzing with messages he no longer opened. The markets had stripped him of millions, but the humiliation stripped him of something more: permanent reputation. The laughter that once fed his ego now played back endlessly on stranger screens, turned into memes, captions in condemnation. For the first time in his life, his money could not buy silence. Meanwhile, Claudia Mercer faced her own reckoning. Sponsors had abandoned her contracts, dissolved, and her follower count plummeted by the hour. In a desperate bid, she went live on Instagram, her face pale, her voice shaking. I want to apologize," she stammered. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I only posted what I saw. I never thought it would cause this kind of reaction." The comments flooded instantly, scrolling faster than she could read. "Too late. You lied and got caught. This isn't an apology. It's damage control. You tried to profit off her humiliation." Tears welled in Claudia's eyes as she continued. "I've lost everything. Please understand, I didn't know, who she was." The chat grew harsher. Viewers weren't moved by her regret. They weren't swayed by her tears. Forgiveness was not trending tonight. The stream ended abruptly, her screen black, but the internet carried on without her chewing her name into a cautionary tale. Back inside Flight 482, the hum of the engines continued as though the skies hadn't frozen, as though the world outside wasn't trembling. Passengers sat quietly, each consumed by the enormity of what they were living through. Notifications buzzed on their phones. Hanhash Skylink freeze hits 5 million mentions. Twitter announced it had become the top global trend, eclipsing entertainment, politics, even war. People in living rooms and offices and stranded terminals whispered the words, "Skylink freeze." It was no longer just a story, it was a phenomenon. Jonas Miller updated his thread, his words crisp. "The world has spoken. Hashart Skylink freeze surpasses 5 million mentions in under 48 hours. This is no longer about one passenger. This is about the systemic demand for dignity." His post was shared by senators, CEOs, professors, and pastors alike, each attaching their own reflection. The movement had outgrown the cabin. It now belonged to the world. Amamira scrolled through her notifications in disbelief. Her follower count had exploded into hundreds of thousands. Invitations poured in from networks, think tanks, advocacy groups, but she kept her camera pointed inward toward the woman in 2A, who remained still calm, untouchable. To her viewers, Amamira whispered, "She hasn't said a word since. She doesn't need to. The world is speaking for her." Lorraine Whitfield sat with her hands folded, eyes steady on the horizon through the oval window. She had not lifted her tablet again. She had not uttered another command. She didn't need to. The system was already at work, carrying her silence into consequences louder than any speech. Executives were resigning. Policies were being rewritten. Reputations were crumbling. And entire industries were shifting, all without her lifting another finger. Veronica Hale had been dismissed. Alan Prescott stripped of power. Claudia Mercer disgraced. And now, under the unyielding gaze of millions, airlines across the globe were signing the Ethics Compliance Accord. Lorraine did not gloat. She did not smile. She simply let the machinery of justice once triggered run its course. The passengers around her felt it the weight of being in the presence of someone who didn't need to raise her voice to change the world. Some lowered their eyes in shame at their earlier silence. Others whispered prayers of gratitude, and some simply sat in awe of their lives, forever marked by the night they had shared a cabin with a woman who could freeze the skies. Alan Prescott scrolled through his phone again, searching for comfort, but found only headlines bearing his name. Prescott removed, arrogance grounded. He let the device slip from his hand, his shoulder slumping. For the first time in his career, no strategy, no ally, no wealth could shield him. Claudia sat in her apartment, curtains drawn, staring at the empty inbox that once brimmed with offers. Her apology had done nothing. Her silence at last was all she had left. And Lorraine, she leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes for a brief moment. To the world outside, it seemed as though she rested. But in truth, she was letting the storm she had summoned sweep through the industry, knowing it no longer required her hand. She had pulled the thread, and the tapestry unraveled on its own. News alerts pinged across the cabin once more. Skylink freeze surges past 5 million. Passengers glanced at Lorraine, realizing the system now spoke for her. She remained silent, eyes closed, her presence louder than any headline. This is Black Stories Unveiled. We share not just humiliation, but the grace that follows. The hall was vast as chandeliers, glittering above rows of world leaders, airline executives, union representatives, and journalists. Banners from every continent lined the stage, and a hush fell as the moderator announced the keynote speaker. All eyes turned toward the figure walking to the podium, Dr. Lorraine Whitfield. She wore a dark emerald suit, sharp lines softened only by a silver pin at her lapel. Her presence was steady, her pace unhurried. She carried no notes, no papers, no devices. She needed none. As she reached the podium, cameras clicked in a storm, broadcasting her face leave to millions. The same face passengers had seen, humiliated in a cabin, was now the face the world leaned in to hear. Beside her stood Evelyn Carter, her silver hair gleaming under the lights. She wasn't dressed for power, but for truth, a simple navy dress, her hands clasped calmly. She was not a policymaker, not a CEO, but her decades of service gave her a gravity no executive could manufacture. Lorraine had asked her personally to stand there shoulder to shoulder as a reminder that reform would not come from boardrooms alone, but from the lived integrity of those who served every flight. Lorraine adjusted the microphone, and silence deepened until the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Her voice when it came was low, measured steady as a current. I didn't freeze the skies to punish. I froze them to reset, to remind us all that dignity is not a luxury, not a privilege, not something granted only to those deemed worthy by others. Dignity is the clearance to fly. A ripple moved through the room. Some executives lowered their eyes ashamed. Others sat straight or defensive. But the words landed everywhere at once, undeniable. I sat in seat to a ticket in hand, and I was told I did not belong. Not because of error, not because of oversight, but because arrogance spoke louder than truth. And when that arrogance humiliated me, it humiliated the system itself. Because if dignity can be denied to one, it can be denied to all. Her eyes swept across the hall, pausing on rows of airline leaders. For decades, we have measured success in numbers, on-time departures, market shares, quarterly profits. But what is success if the people we carry are stripped of dignity? What does it mean to fly faster, cheaper, wider, if bias still sits in our cabins, whispering that some passengers do not belong? The camera zoomed closer, her calm expression filling screens across the world. Evelyn's presence beside her added, "Wait," the silent witness, the voice that had said, "That's not how we were trained," now embodied as living proof. I froze the skies, Lorraine continued, because silence had become too expensive. The cost of looking away, of dismissing humiliation as trivial, had grown heavier than grounded planes. $4 billion lost in 24 hours is less than the price of dignity lost for decades. And so I forced us all to stop, to look, to listen. The room remained hushed. A few pens scratched notes. Journalists leaned forward, aware they were recording a moment that would be replayed for generations. Lorraine's voice softened, but grew sharper with conviction. Change cannot be left to chance. Reform cannot be optional. Today you will sign the Ethics Compliance Accord. But remember, a signature is not integrity. A policy is not compassion. These are tools. Integrity lives in people. Dignity survives only if it is defended daily in every aisle, in every cabin, by every attendant and every passenger who chooses respect over silence. She turned slightly, gesturing to Evelyn. This woman beside me gave 3 decades of her life to serving passengers. She carried children when they were frightened. She calmed tempers when storms raged. She embodied the dignity that uniforms should represent. And when she saw arrogance that night, she spoke. Her courage matters as much as my authority. Reform must honor both the power at the top and the voices on the floor. Evelyn's eyes glistened as she bowed her head slightly. The cameras caught her hand trembling, not with fear, but with the weight of history. She had thought her years of service were over. Now her witness stood immortalized beside one of the most powerful women in the world. Lorraine's gaze swept the hall one last time. To those who mocked, to those who dismissed, to those who laughed, I say only this. You helped build the silence. And to those who spoke, who recorded, who dared to say this is wrong, you helped build the reset. We are here because dignity found defenders in live streams, in whispered protests, in quiet refusals, and that more than any lock or code is what will change the skies. The audience erupted into applause, not polite, not obligatory, but thunderous, sustained. Some leaders clapped reluctantly, but most rose to their feet. Hashtags lit up screens once more. At Reset, the skies hashed dignity first. Whitfield addressed reporters rushed to file headlines. Whitfield W. froze the skies to reset. Evelyn Carter stands beside Skylink architect in historic address for passengers stranded across the world watching the speech on televisions in terminals and lounges. The applause became their own. Strangers hugged, tears welled, voices whispered, "She said it for all of us." And in the cabin of Flight 482, where it had all begun, passengers replayed the live stream of her speech on their phones, realizing with awe that they had been witnesses to the spark that set the world alight. As the applause roared on and cameras flashed, Evelyn Carter leaned slightly toward the microphone beside Lorraine, preparing to speak her own truth. The world already listening leaned closer still. The applause from Lorraine Whitfield's speech still echoed across headlines when new faces began to rise in her shadow, each carrying a fragment of the change she had unleashed. The first was Marcus Lee, the young security officer whose quiet confirmation of her Tier 1 pass had become a symbol of integrity. Within weeks, his name was no longer just a trending hashtag, but a fixture in news reports, interviews, and policy circles. He stood in a modest hall lined with flight attendants and security trainees, unveiling the sign behind him, Crew Ethics Academy. Cameras flashed as he spoke, his voice steady, though his hands trembled slightly. I am not a CEO. I am not an architect of Skylink. I am a crew officer who made a choice to tell the truth. This academy exists to train every airline worker to do the same, to remind them that integrity is not optional. It is our only clearance to serve. The room erupted in applause. Unions endorsed the project. Governments offered funding, and crews across the world signed petitions to enroll. Marcus had not sought fame, but it had found him, and now he was shaping it into something larger than himself. Meanwhile, Amamira Hassan, the young engineer whose live stream carried the truth into millions of homes, found herself on the stage of an international technology and ethics summit. The hall was filled with diplomats, executives, academics, and activists. Amamira's palms were slick with nerves as she adjusted the microphone. I was just a passenger, she began, her voice quiet but clear. I never planned to become a witness for millions. But when I saw what happened, I knew silence would make me complicit. So I held my phone. I hit go live. And I told the truth. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know she could freeze the skies. I only knew that humiliation was wrong. Her eyes swept the audience. Technology does not give us courage. People do. What I did is what any of you could have done. And what I ask is that you do not forget that ordinary witnesses can carry extraordinary change. The crowd rose to its feet, the applause, thunderous tears glistening on the cheeks of young activists who saw themselves reflected in her. But outside the halls of applause, debate raged. On television panels, analysts sparred. On op-ed pages, columns clashed. One side insisted the Whitfield lock was the boldest reform in aviation history, a necessary reckoning to purge arrogance and bias from the skies. Without it, a commentator argued on CNN, the humiliation of passengers would have remained a quiet shame. Daru Whitfield forced us to confront it. She forced us to reset, but others bristled their words sharp. This was overreach, a business anchor countered on CNBC. She froze 190 flights, cost billions, and disrupted families worldwide. Was that justice or vengeance disguised as reform? The question rippled across living rooms and boardrooms, stirring heated conversations on social media. Hashtags split into camps. Hash reform, the skies against hash overreach. Whitfield passengers stranded on that historic night posted videos of missed weddings and lost connections. Some praising Lorraine for making their suffering meaningful, others furious at being collateral damage in her fight. Comment threads filled with moral judgment. She did what had to be done. She abused her power. Both can be true. Governments joined the fray. In Europe, regulators hailed the Ethics Accord as a model for corporate accountability. In Asia, ministers questioned whether giving architects such unchecked authority endangered stability. At the United Nations, debates grew heated. Delegates from smaller nations demanded global protections for passengers, while others warned against concentrating power in the hands of a few. Lorraine's act had broken the silence, but it had also fractured consensus. Back in the United States, a town hall meeting captured the division perfectly. An elderly man stood and raised his voice. "I missed my grandson's graduation because of that freeze. Do you call that justice?" A young woman responded, her voice just as fierce. "My mother was humiliated by an airline worker 20 years ago, and no one cared. If it takes grounding flights to stop that cycle, then ground them all." The room erupted in shouts, applause, and argument. Justice, it seemed, was in the eye of the beholder. And yet, through the noise, Marcus Lee continued to build his academy brick by brick, principle by principle. Amamira continued to speak, reminding audiences of the simple truth. She hadn't known who Lorraine was. Only that silence was wrong. And Evelyn Carter, her words replayed nightly on BBC, continued to anchor the narrative in dignity. Lorraine herself stayed silent. She declined interviews, refused television appearances, ignored invitations to panels. Her silence only fueled the debate. Was she a hero who had reset the skies or a tyrant who had hijacked them? The world argued, speculated, and chose sides. But in seat 2A, in the cabin where it all began, she had already given her answer. On the floor of the United Nations, a delegate's voice rose above the noise. "We must decide. Is the Whitfield lock a blueprint for reform or a warning against overreach?" The chamber erupted in debate, the question hanging heavy over a world still grounded by the weight of dignity. This is Black Stories Unveiled. We honor not just the power that holds others to account, but the grace that gives back. The hall was quiet, the kind of quiet that came not from emptiness, but from anticipation. It was a gathering unlike any other. Leaders, crew unions, activists, passengers, and regulators, all seated together, their divisions set aside for one evening. At the center of the stage, under a single spotlight, stood Lorraine Whitfield. She had refused dozens of interviews, turned down television specials, ignored corporate overtures. But tonight, she had agreed to speak, not for networks, not for headlines, but because of a letter that had reached her desk. In her hands, she held it now, a single sheet of paper creased at the edges, the ink smudged in places where the writer's pen had pressed too hard. She adjusted the microphone, unfolded the page, and began to read. "My name is Aisha Daniels. I am 24 years old. I just finished my training as a flight attendant, the first in my family to wear the uniform. When I saw the videos of what happened to you, my heart broke because I thought if they could humiliate a woman like you with all your power, what will they do to me? But then I watched you stand tall. I watched the skies freeze, and I thought, if she can hold her ground, so can I. Because of you, I know I can do my job with dignity. Because of you, I know silence is not my only option. Thank you, Dr. Whitfield, for reminding the world that we belong. Her voice wavered only slightly as she lowered the letter. The audience was still, some leaning forward with tears in their eyes, other bowing their heads in reverence. For a moment, there were no cameras, no divisions, no arguments, only the weight of a young woman's hope carried on ink and paper. Lorraine placed the letter carefully on the podium, her fingers resting on it a moment longer, as if to honor the writer's courage. Then she lifted her gaze to the hall, her voice firm, clear, resonant. I did not freeze the skies to break the industry. I froze them to remind us of something older than schedules, older than profits, older than the arrogance that has crept into these aisles. I froze them to remind us that dignity is the only clearance that matters. And dignity must be protected not by locks and codes alone, but by the people who live this work every day. She paused, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. Tonight, I am creating the Whitfield Fund for Ethics and Empathy Training. $50 million will be dedicated to training flight attendants, pilots, and crew around the world, not only in safety, but in humanity. We will teach not only how to evacuate cabins in 30 seconds, but how to see passengers in 30 seconds as human beings worthy of respect. We will build a new foundation not on fear, but on empathy. The hall erupted in applause, not thunderous at first, but deep, sustained, rolling like a wave. Crew members in the audience rose to their feet, clapping with tears on their faces. Activists nodded their fists pressed to their chests. Even executives, many of whom had resisted her, found themselves rising, compelled by the inevitability of the moment. Lorraine raised her hand gently, and the room quieted again. Her voice softened, carrying the cadence of legacy. $4 billion were lost in a single day, but what was gained was greater the recognition that silence costs more. Tonight, I return $50 million to the industry, not to punish, but to plant seeds of empathy that will outlast me, outlast all of us, and reshape what it means to fly. She turned slightly, gesturing toward Evelyn Carter in the front row. This fund is dedicated to those who carried dignity long before I froze the skies. To the Evelyn Carters who walked aisles in storms, who soothed frightened children, who chose kindness even when arrogance was easy. They are the true architects of respect. I only built a system. They built trust. Evelyn's eyes brimmed with tears as she placed a hand over her heart, mouthing words of thanks. Lorraine's final words rose like a benediction, quiet but unforgettable. Power is not what you hold over others. Power is what you give back even after they tried to take your seat. And grace is when you give back more than they ever expected. The hall was silent for a heartbeat, as though the world inhaled together. And then the applause began, thunderous, rising, rolling, like a storm breaking into sunlight. Hashtags lit screens instantly and shot at Grace in action. Whitfield Fund Dignity Legacy. Around the globe, stranded passengers watched from terminals. Crew huddled around airport televisions, families in their homes. They saw not the woman humiliated in seat 2A, but the leader who had transformed humiliation into reform, cruelty into clarity, silence and deceit. As Lorraine stepped back from the podium, she folded Aisha's letter carefully and placed it in her jacket pocket. Cameras followed her flashes, ignited, but her steps were steady, unhurried. The steps of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. She had frozen the skies. She had reset them, and now she had planted a legacy. As the crowd roared and hashtags spread across the world, Lorraine paused briefly, looking upward. Her whisper unheard by the microphones, but caught by those nearest, carried the promise of her final act. May they carry it farther than I ever could. The days after the Whitfield Fund was announced became a cascade of responses, each carrying the weight of history settling into place. Communities across the globe, from stranded passengers in Tokyo to cabin crews in Johannesburg, reacted not with anger now, but with reflection. In town halls, churches, and living rooms, people repeated the same line from Lorraine's speech. Dignity is the clearance to fly. For many, it became more than a phrase. It became a prayer, a mantra, a truth etched into everyday conversation. Airlines scrambled to realign themselves with the new order. Executives who once resisted now leaned into reform. their press conferences filled with promises to implement empathy, training to create new oversight councils to measure not just punctuality, but humanity. Some changes were cosmetic, meant to appease, but others ran deeper. Anonymous reporting systems for discrimination, diversity embedded in leadership pipelines, dignity clauses added to union contracts. The Whitfield lock had forced them not just to apologize, but to restructure. In Washington, congressional hearings opened with packed audiences. Senators held up photographs from Flight 482, the scattered papers, the laughing man, the attendant's smirk, and grilled airline CEOs under oath. "This is not isolated," one senator said firmly. "This is systemic, and this is what happens when arrogance outweighs accountability." The hearings were broadcast live, millions watching, as executives stammered through questions, forced to admit that Lorraine Whitfield had done in one night what they had failed to do in decades: make the skies answer to dignity. In Europe, the debate took a different tone. The European Parliament voted overwhelmingly to endorse a continent-wide adoption of the Ethics Compliance Accord. Their resolution praised Lorraine by name, calling her an unwilling but necessary architect of reform. In Asia, regulators pushed for global harmonization, warning that without shared standards, dignity would remain uneven across borders. Even in nations slow to embrace reform, voices rose in protest until leaders relented. The ripple had become a tide, but perhaps the most poignant responses came not from governments or boardrooms, but from ordinary people. Letters poured into Lorraine's office, handwritten, typed, emailed, tweeted. "From a mother in Lagos, you gave my daughter the courage to dream of becoming a pilot. From a retiree in Chicago, I flew for 40 years. I saw arrogance. I stayed silent. Thank you for breaking it for me. From a young boy in Mumbai. When I grow up, I want to build something like Skylink, but I want to build it kinder." Clips of Evelyn Carter's BBC interview replayed nightly, her steady voice reminding the world that dignity was never optional. Marcus Lee's Crew Ethics Academy grew beyond what he imagined, now backed by international funding, a pipeline for generations of crew trained not only in safety, but in respect. Amra Hassan became a sought-after speaker on witness integrity. Her story taught in universities as proof of how one live stream could change an industry. Claudia Mercer, her influence gone, faded into obscurity. Alan Prescott remained disgraced, a footnote in stories that rarely mentioned his name without the word mockery attached. Veronica Hale, dismissed and exiled, lived quietly in anonymity. They were reminders of what arrogance cost. Lorraine, however, refused the spotlight. She declined interviews, declined panels, declined the endless requests for memoirs and documentaries. She let others carry the message. Now she had frozen the skies. Her role was complete. The fund was established. The accord signed, the legacy planted. Her silence was not withdrawal, it was grace. Months later, a quiet scene unfolded far from the glare of cameras. A new flight boarded its passengers, weary but expectant. In first-class seat 2A, Lorraine Whitfield took her place once again. She wore a simple black suit, no entourage, no announcement. The hum of boarding filled the cabin as attendants moved down the aisle. One of them, a young woman with dark skin and bright eyes, paused at her seat. She smiled, genuine and unforced, and said softly, "Welcome aboard, Dr. Whitfield. We're honored to have you." Lorraine inclined her head, returning the smile. Around her, passengers noticed, but did not whisper in mockery this time. They nodded with respect, some quietly murmuring her name with reverence. No phones rose to film her humiliation. Instead, cameras stayed lowered, as though the world collectively agreed some moments deserved dignity unrecorded. As the plane lifted into the sky, the clouds spread beneath them like an ocean of white. Lorraine looked out the window, her reflection faint against the glass. In her pocket, she still carried Aisha's letter, folded and worn from touch. She placed her hand over it, a small gesture of promise to the next generation. Her voice, quiet, was heard only by herself. And perhaps the skeet was never about freezing the flights. It was about unfreezing our conscience. The engines roared, the world below shrank, and for the first time since the night of humiliation, Lorraine Whitfield flew not as a target, not as a disruptor, but as what she had always been, a woman who belonged. Do you believe justice must sometimes disrupt the world to be heard, or should it always wait for